when you're constantly in the arena and your emotions are involved with that, you're thinking about all the responsibilities that you have of making sure that this child turns out with the best and full potential that they're supposed to come out. It can be very exhausting.
Welcome to another episode of The Paradigm Shift. With us today we have Biffy. She's an entrepreneur and a parenting coach. Biffy, why don't you take a second and introduce yourself? What exactly do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as an entrepreneur, I'm running a couple businesses. One is in marketing. And with that, it's just as you said with paradigm shifts, it's to help people create the freedom that they want and really understand that we're capable to fully unlock our full potential. So, I build leaders in that aspect and then help them be able to continue to pass that forward. And then I also am a parent coach, which again is another way where I unlock people's full potential, where I really help parents be able to see what they're capable of, help them find the confidence in what they need to be able to parent in the way that they would like to parent, away from some of the things that maybe they have been programmed to naturally do with their children. And I help support people be able to find where they want to go in that direction as well.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into parenting and hearing some of your tips and some of your proven techniques. But I want to take you way back from the moment you were born. Can you just take us from where do you come from and tell us a little bit about your parents and your upbringing and what did you have to overcome to get to this point?
I love that question. So I was born and raised, and I currently live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My parents were amazing people. My dad was a doctor and retired, when I was about 7, and then my mom was a nurse, and just always, they both worked so hard to make sure to give us a really great, phenomenal life, and that's something that they did, which I'm very grateful for. I think some of the things I had to overcome in regards to paradigms was a lot of things in my upbringing that I interpreted being a woman and probably the baby of the family as well. I grew up with my sister being older, so she was in college at that point, and then I grew up with 5 brothers. So there was a lot of different types of ideas of what a man and woman was supposed to be. And I had to overcome a lot of paradigms about a woman being small and quiet. And I would say that's the biggest paradigm shift that's been a challenge in everything in life to overcome, and especially in entrepreneurship, because you cannot be small and quiet in that type of environment.
Yeah. So, how did you become an entrepreneur?
Oh, I love that question. You got great questions. So it happened in 2020, really was, I think I've always sort of had the internal lifestyle of it. I owned a small business that, obviously failed. And I learned a lot from that situation. And I didn't realize that in a way I already had an entrepreneur heart at that point. And when 2020 hit, I fell into, a dead end trying to figure out what to do. And of course, with COVID happening, I couldn't do anything. And so I really had to sit down with myself and figure things out. And I actually sat down and started meditating. I started fasting, and I fell into the work of Bob Proctor, his abundance meditation.
Mhm.
And I was going through a lot emotionally, and spiritually. And it was like that evening, once I heard that meditation, it was boom, just an instant change, instant turnaround in life. And I realized who I actually was. Now that takes a while to embrace, and you're still trying to work through that every day. But I realized who I was at that point, and I accepted who I was. And I fell into a couple of other things to dabble into entrepreneurship here and there. But I really got into, at that point, learning about how I'd always been passionate about parenting, for example, because my son just turned 5 and I have a 14-month-old daughter. And prior to having my son, I didn't want to have kids because I saw a lot of paradigms around that. There's people who will say you end up getting engaged, then they're like, when are you going to get married? And then after that, they're like, when are you going to have kids? So then you have your first kid, and then they're like, when are you going to have your second kid? So it's just these things that we're programmed to ask, to say,
Yeah.
to do. And I didn't want to have kids just to have them. And so when I got pregnant with my son, I fell into a little bit of personal growth here and there to really see how I wanted to become a parent. So fast forward to 2020, I said, I really want to find a way to help parents. And I discovered this thing called parent coaching. And so I applied for the program and certification that I looked into. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to get in, because there were a couple of qualifications in it that I just thought, well, I don't have that experience. I have this degree that's a dead end for me. And, the universe moved mountains, and I got accepted. And so just completely happy and grateful for that. And that journey started. And then after that, a year later, I met my mentor, and I'm in marketing with him, and helping people create financial freedom as well. And that's been such a journey too. He studied under Bob Proctor for about 7 years, so I get a taste of a lot of what he experienced.
Oh, that's so cool. So, basically, what I'm getting at is you in 2020, thanks to all the shenanigans, you kind of found your purpose. You followed your heart. You had passion for children, and just parents need a lot of help, right? Parenting is not easy.
No,
What
not at all.
are, share with us, three things that work for you as a parent? Three tips that are super practical. Parents who are listening right now could just go home and test it out for a week. Like three things that work for you and
Mhm.
maybe for some of your clients.
Absolutely. What I really loved about the specific program I got into is they really value looking within. And that's something I encourage parents to do, because you'll hear a lot of society discourage that. They say, for example, if you do that as a parent, that's being selfish. But really, actually, being able to look within helps us find where we're lacking wisdom for a calmness of mind with being a parent and with our children, because James Allen talks about that. He says calmness of mind is one of the beautiful jewels of wisdom. And so one of the things I encourage parents to do is find ways to help you look within, whether that be in any kind of form of self-care, if that's a hobby that can help you do that, if that's taking some time for yourself to be able to reflect, if that's meditation, practices like that, so that you can step away from the parenting arena when you're constantly in the arena and your emotions are involved with that. You're thinking about all the responsibilities that you have of making sure that this child turns out with the best and full potential that they're supposed to come out. It can be very exhausting. So find ways to get out of the arena, look within yourself, look outside of just saying, oh, I'm just the stay-at-home mom, or I'm just the dad, but find ways where that identity can actually be very empowered, and figure out a way to do that. So looking within is a huge thing I really encourage with parents. And then a second one I would say is connection. And a lot of times I'll have parents that are trying to figure out the best way to be connecting with their children, best way to reestablish connection if there's some reason that that's been broken. And so finding where they can reestablish that connection is really key and crucial, because one of the key principles that I think is very important in general in life, and something that I really follow, is what you focus on grows. And so a lot of times parents are already coming in with a negative mindset about their child, and that's what's growing and manifesting. So if there's a way where we can change the perspective to help the growth change in something where we can see potential, or we can see that there's the ability for a connection to have in, whatever they're coming to me for, then we'll be able to work and find a place to establish that growth. And I would say, let's see, a third thing that is really important to have parents do is be coachable. And what I mean by that is, I don't ever coach to say you should do this. I think that actually that can make even a more stressful approach, and that can actually be counterintuitive of some of the things that we're trying to do with helping parents feel empowered and unlearn or get away from some of that programming that they think parenting should be. And so when I say being coachable, I mean being able for me and them to co-construct and collaborate together to see what will help be best for their situation and their values, and where can there be room where my expertise and suggestions can come in to help the family just grow and flourish.
Okay, what about some like practical tips, like something like a 3 second rule or something? I don't know, like some
Mm,
things that you have experienced with your own kids and it actually works for you, and some things that you've suggested as a practical technique that parents could um, implement with their kids so they could lead them better. You know what I mean?
absolutely. Yeah, I think a really big practical tip is you don't have to address the issue right in the moment. So what I mean by that is, I've got a 5-year-old, and
Hmm.
when kids are younger, especially the younger ages, for example, they don't have a prefrontal cortex, or that's growing and developing. And as kids get to about age 7 or 8, that does get a little bit more improved, and they start to think a little bit more rationally. They're starting to think with some of the conversations you can have with them. But before that, they really don't have that. So that's why people come to me and they're like, my toddler is so moody. And it's like, well, your toddler's moody because their brain hasn't fully developed, and they don't have that prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain to help them have that reasoning. So it's just
Mm.
like, here's their emotions, and if you tell them, whatever, we're not able to do that, or we need to do that later, bam, it goes right into their emotions. And
Yeah.
so what parents end up doing is their kids on the ground throwing a tantrum, screaming, and the kids already in reptilian brain mode or fight flight mode, and they try to reason with them at that point. And I know as an adult, even with a fully developed prefrontal cortex, when I'm in an emotional state, I can't get anybody to sit down with me and have me be, reasoned with whatever's going on, right? And my brain's fully developed, so to speak. So um so that's something really important I try to really let parents know, is there's something in us that's ingrained to be like, I have to address this with them right now. It's like a dog, like, we're taught you have to address a dog's behavior right away, but it's
Hmm.
different with children. If you address the behavior, it's not going to be effective because they're already in a state that's of distress. And
Right.
so they're not going to hear you out. So that's again with that piece of connection, find ways to reestablish that connection. And an example I have is, my son was upset about something, I don't know what, because that happens pretty frequently. But being able to find a place to say, hey, let's go play with your Legos. And so now his mind's set on that with the Legos, or, we go and have a water gun fight. So we establish that reconnection. And then we can talk about what happened. Hey, the way that you spoke with mommy and, you said these words, those words were disrespectful. Let's talk about that. Why did you say those words? And then we can even establish what are some strategies we can do for next time, because that's another thing is he didn't know how to quite communicate what was best. So he found a way to communicate it, but it was disrespectful towards how he said it to me or whatever. And so now we can communicate and talk about strategies on ways to talk so that that doesn't have to happen again. And again, it's like life and with paradigms too, it repetition, it takes repetition. Your kid's not going to get something like that in one try, and so it's going to be something that they have to constantly hear. So even making a song might be able to help them too with different things. I always recommend kind of little jingles from Daniel Tiger.
Hmm.
Those ones are really good too. And then you don't have to make them up. You can just go, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can go and get them from Daniel Tiger.
Yeah, that was my daughter's favorite at some point.
Yeah.
So, now that you're learning so much about parenting, and I'm sure you're diving into this as your passion, what are some things that you realize were mistakes in your parents' parenting style? Like a couple of things that you're like, wow, my parents did it completely wrong, and
Hmm.
you had to recover from that and change the way you think, so you don't pass it on to your children. Are there some things that you've realized were not such a good example?
Absolutely. And it's funny to look back at all that and be like, wow, I know what they went through now and what their mindset was with everything going on in the world or trying to think this way. And I've noticed this from at least my generation, growing up from I'm a early 90s kid, and there was something going on in that generation of there's four different styles of parenting, and the one that was predominantly happening at that point was called authoritarian parenting. And so my parents fell underneath that style. And I would say it's got a focus on having a lot of high expectation on your kids to
Mm.
behave. So it's my way or the highway. If this isn't followed, we're going to either go or we're going to have a spanking. That sort of parenting of, behave right now, otherwise we're done. And there's a lot of research coming out about that type of parenting where uh I don't typically coach under that parenting, I'll say. I go more for
What are the other three styles? I'm curious.
yeah, yeah. So there's authoritarian, there's authoritative. So those ones always get mixed up, but authoritative is the one I go more towards. And then there's neglectful, which obviously I would say don't go to that one. It means you're not parenting at all. And then there's permissive, where there's too much for the children, and so there's not enough boundaries or guidance for them. But authoritative is the one that is more of a balance of being able to establish those boundaries, being able to guide your children, and also finding a place where they can flourish to grow with who they're supposed to become. And I grew up a lot with the authoritarian type of parenting. And there's a lot of studies coming out where I would say the cons are outweighing the pros in it, because the pros that I really saw out of it was you get well behaved children. The cons are people grow up with a lot of low self esteem issues,
Hmm.
and they grow up with an inability to think, because when a parent comes with an authoritarian type of way to address the behavior, it really doesn't cause you to think of, okay, why do my parents want to address this behavior with me? Because that fear is coming in of, if I continue to do this, I'll be punished. So there's
Yeah.
no place to think about the action of what somebody's doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Decision making is a problem, right? Because
Absolutely.
or being afraid to really stand their position. So when you ask, like I've had some people that I would ask a deep question and they will take a long time before they answer,
Yes.
um, just because they're afraid not to say the wrong thing or not to disappoint me, or and that's what I've noticed with that parenting style. So
Hmm.
growing up, I had a couple of friends, and one of my friends was physically abused. His parents kind of didn't spare the rod.
Yeah. Yeah.
and and my parents, my dad, he's a great man, but he lost his dad at early age, and his style was very, like, he was criticizing to the ridiculous, like a very high standard, thinking that this is the best motivation. So I felt that this is kind of like a it's like a verbal abuse, it could be, it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So me and my buddy, we had another friend who came from very stable home, and we used to get in trouble, and I would start like the verbal fight. I would like when I used to talk back because I couldn't do it at home. I used to talk back to teachers like the black sheep, or I used to provoke other students, and then my buddy would kick their ass. We were a good team. Like I was like blah blah blah, and then he he would
Good
do that.
team indeed.
And then we had a friend who was very smart and very balanced, and he would be the guy, be like, "Guys, what are you doing? Why are you doing this?" And their parenting was like his parents educated him on different situations. They kind of treated him like an adult and always gave him a choice, and he always made the right choice because we would consciously get in trouble. We were like, "Yeah, come on, let's get drunk and do this," right? And
Right.
he would be like, "Oh, this is so stupid to get drunk, to have this headache, to risk to do this." And we are like, "Oh, you're such a wuss. Come on, man, let's go." But he already been through this with his parents, and they gave him the freedom to choose, and he chooses not to go through those consequences. And like I learned that um, at a later age that this could be a parenting style,
Hmm.
and this is the one that I want to practice with my children. Kind of like show them the the consequences of their choice. Like you could choose to do this, you could choose to do this. This is what will happen eventually if you continue to do this, and this is what will happen if you continue to do that. And it's up to you. You're the captain of your soul. You're the master of your universe. Like you can decide if you want to go to jail or if you want to go to you know live somewhere in the nice neighborhoods. So, what's your experience with generational curse, and how do you approach clients and parents who are dealing with that? With well, that's the way I was raised, or kind of like stuck with that chains of the generational curse.
There's a book I'd recommend to anybody who reads this, especially as parents. It's the book you wish your parents had read and your kids will thank you for. And what I love about that book is it really helps to bring those places together, right? Because we do have things that we're bringing in as parents. I think when people become parents, at least this is what I struggled with, is I feel like I'm an adult and I have to have everything together, but we're not going to. We're human, and there's things that we're growing and learning, and part of parenting is to grow and learn in those things as well. And so there's moments where something will happen with my kids. And what this book talks about is oftentimes if there's something that you're wrestling with your children, or it's that button that triggers you in some sort of way, it's typically something from your past. And that's what the author speaks about, is her daughter needed help on the, I think it was the monkey bars, something like that. And she just got angry and, told her daughter, get down right now. And, her daughter was afraid, trying to figure it out on her own. And when they went back to that playground and they spoke about it, she realized that she was being very hard on her daughter because her parents never helped her that way. They
Hmm.
said, you have to figure it out. You have to do it on your own. And so that came out of her, and she realized that she was projecting that hurt and that anger towards her daughter. And I think there's a lot of things that we are trying to figure out. And unfortunately, when we're at a place where we're struggling, it will get projected on to our kids. And in regards to generational curses, I would say that's something I really admire about both of my parents, with the struggles that they had to go through.
Hmm.
My dad had to go through, actually, both of them had to go through um, significant poverty and trying to figure out, overcome that. My mom had to figure out a lot of things with an upbringing of, not necessarily the best for a child, and had to help raise her two younger siblings. And so she was the oldest, being a kid and trying to figure out how to take care of them in a lot of situations. And so I think it's, as you said, each generation becomes more and more aware of something. And that's actually, I would say, when Bob Proctor talks about having a purpose to wake up to every day, that's my purpose. Is I want each generation to be more and more aware
Hmm.
than the one before it. And as you're speaking about your experience with you and your friends, it's making me see that I do believe this, but it's something that I emphasize again, is parenting is such a strong foundation.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of people, I think that's what's going on in our programming too, is, you'll see shows and you see the, I don't know, the stressed out mom and the dad that's just stupid and doesn't know anything. That's the kind of programming you see on TV constantly. And that just degrades the value of parenting over and over again. And then, you have the parent who's staying at home and changing diapers every day and listening to screaming all the time. And again, that feels degrading. And there's the idea that because there's not money involved, that there's nothing of value for that. But that's something I really am trying to press and emphasize with anyone who works with me, is that they're raising the next generation.
Right.
And it's a huge it's a huge honor to be doing something like that, and a lot to think about and need support in, definitely.
Now, when it comes down to spanking and verbally raising your voice, or using some strong words, or using fear of loss techniques, or hope to gain techniques like bribing, or um, any type of manipulation, um, or choosing, like, is there any like a healthy formula? What do you think about spanking, and what do you think about verbal abuse? When does it cross the line? When does it become an abuse? And when does it become a responsibility of the parent to do some of that? Like, like, parents, I think, need education to know what is abuse and what is a responsibility that's not being covered. And uh,
Yeah.
can you please give us some light on that?
Absolutely. I actually did a video a couple years ago, and it's particularly about it was more about, because I grew up in a religious home, and a lot of people were telling me to spank my children because it was biblical. And I actually did a video on saying that spanking isn't biblical and explained why. And of course, the video and sound quality of that is not going to be anywhere near what we're having now, just because I didn't know what I was doing at that point in time. I still don't know, but it's a little bit better now. um, but I did a video on that, and I also talked about some of the research with spanking, and it's as you and I were talking about, with authoritarian parenting, a lot of that type of style, spanking,
Hmm.
punishment, it falls under that, making more of a way to have a kid disengage with something in a negative way, to have those things be negative. And so there's a lot of research going on with spanking where, again, it's not being as effective as people think it is, because they did a study of, I don't remember how many households, but a fair amount of households, where they were tracking how many times the kid was, misbehaving and getting spanked for whatever it was, and then how long it would take for them to start back with the behavior again. Typically, the kid would start back with the behavior again right away or within the next day. And it's just as what I was telling you, Vilko, because they didn't have the opportunity to reason with themselves to say, I wonder why my parents are saying that's not a good idea.
Hmm.
They just were in that fear mode of, I don't want to get spanked, I don't want to get punished. That's some of my thoughts on spanking. Is this is what I will say. I think there's a lot of things in parenting right now that people want the quick fix, and that's what happened with, I think, authoritarian parenting. Is it did give you the quick fix, right? Your kids stopped screaming, your kids stopped misbehaving, so you did have the quick fix, but it didn't go for the long run. It didn't go for, where is this going to go in the future? What's going to help my kid be able to see and understand this? What kind of repetition do I need to create for this, so that there can be more understanding about the world with this, or about, what they're struggling with, or it may not even be a misbehavior. It may just be your child needs some more guidance on something.
Hmm.
And so that's some of the things, I see with that. And yeah, so I did do a video on that, I think 2 years ago.
So you are pro spanking or against it?
I'm personally against it. I have
Why is it not
coached.
biblical?
Mm. So you'll hear the biblical term "spare the rod, spoil a child."
Hmm.
That's what people say. They say it's in the Bible.
Hmm.
That's in Proverbs. It actually does not say that at all. What happened was, there was a preacher, I think in the early 1800s, I want to say.
Hmm.
He used that to support spanking,
Mm.
and started saying that. And then, of course, what happened? Everyone said that it was in the Bible. And there's a lot of things, if you really get to looking at it, because it's really confusing. And I know people say um
Are
that
you
the
saying that
Bible.
it was added in translation, or like in the original Proverbs it wasn't
Mhm.
there?
It wasn't there in the original Proverbs. It was a preacher that said something on the pulpit, and everyone said, oh, that's biblical and that's in the
It's a
Bible.
religious thing, huh?
Yes.
Because I'm thinking from God's standpoint, if God wanted us to be spanked, imagine, like, if I flip it on the parent, like, parents make mistakes every day,
Hmm.
consciously make mistakes.
Yep.
So it will be like getting into like a boxing match and getting knocked out
Yeah.
if that was fair.
Yeah. Um,
Plus, there was another thing, like Orthodox Christians, because I come from Eastern Europe, Bulgaria, and Greeks and Bulgarians share the same faith. Orthodox Christians, there was a guy, Augustine, back in the day, and he was sharing that he was very charismatic, and he was sharing that God is always in control, and he does good and he does bad. He does everything.
mhm.
So until today, people are just super afraid of God, and they use God like the nuke button. Like, oh, you broke your leg because of what you did to me. a week ago. Oh, because
Mhm.
you respected me, now I'm gonna pray to God so He can punish you. You know,
Yeah.
so maybe it's a religious thing, like you're saying, because I don't see how it would help. You know,
Right.
it's a very quick fix. It's almost, but it's like how it's almost like you're using it like with you create an orphan mindset. You create a slave mentality by not giving free will, free choice, and God is all
Mhm.
about free will and free choice. So it's better to let your kid burn his finger, than punishing your kid for burning his finger. I guess that's just my opinion.
Mhm.
But it's so difficult, because there's also the other aspect, the other end, when parents could be uh, enabling their children, where they serve them like they're the slaves. That's kind of like
Mhm.
my parents are kind of like that, from their love, they express their love in a different way, where they serve their children like they're the slaves of the children. They would serve them food, and because that gives them pleasure, do their
Right.
laundry. and then
Yeah.
and then their children are disabled, they go out in the world to live with some roommates, and they don't even clean up after themselves.
Yeah.
And then they become dependent on their spouse, because even if they don't have a healthy relationship, if the spouse is the one to take care of them, like their emotional intelligence stops at a child. And there's a lot of that. Plus there's also the other end, with lack of authority, where children kind of grow up on their own with YouTube, and because of the for the sake of peace, oh yeah, let them have the iPad. And
Mhm.
then they have a rude awakening at some point, like, where did you get those beliefs from? Too late.
Yeah.
So what's a healthy what's a healthy medium, and when does parents when do parents drop the ball? And if it's not spanking, okay, we agree it's not spanking, then I guess you are on the same position, like education and freedom of choice, or education and some boundaries. Is it, what do you prefer? Fear of loss, kind of like, hey, if you don't do this,
Mm.
then something will happen, which brings us back to, that's the reason why I use this example with Augustine. Then that will make you the parent who does good and bad. So you're not going to be always you know associated with a good parent,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
changes children's perception of God ultimately, because they don't think God is always good in that way.
Right. Right.
So what do you support? Because I keep mumbling.
I love your, I mean, you said so much. I'm like, oh, and this and that and this and that. I mean, one thing I'll say, Velko, is I agree with you, because I think coming from an authoritarian style with, being raised in a religious home and with God, there's a lot of times when I speak and communicate with God now. It's gotten a lot better, but I always thought God was mad at me,
Hmm.
or God was just disappointed in me. And as I grew up to become a parent and thought about, would I be this hard on my kids? I was like, oh
Right.
no, absolutely not. And then it was like, well, is God being this hard on me? And I really had to think about that, because that was just always the type of relationship I had with God, was thinking that God was just always mad at me and I couldn't do enough. And so there really is a lot that reflects on parenting, with how we see our relationship with God. And um, what I do for parents is I do have something where I assess different types of parenting styles. It's a different thing. It's not the parenting styles I just spoke with you about, but it's a tool to help parents, because what it does is it helps them see if they're, for example, a feeler parent, a sensor, an intuitive, or a thinker parent. And that helps you see with how you perceive the world. So, for example, I'm a feeler parent, and something with that I need to be aware of in my parenting style is one, my boundaries, because I will be more in that place of wanting to enable and serve my children. And that's something in my parenting style that I have to be aware of. For example, another thing as a feeler parent is because I feel, and that's how I perceive the world. If my kid says something, again, my 5-year-old, he's saying whatever, and he's not always being rude. It's just he's trying to communicate. I have to be aware to not get hurt by that and to not see it as a personal attack against me.
Hmm.
It's he's trying to communicate. He doesn't know how to communicate the proper way. So now let's talk about that. And so there's a lot of times I have to be aware to not take anything personally that my children do, um, with that type of stuff as examples. So that's one thing I do is I have that as an assessment when I do coach families and I do coach parents to help them find that type of insight for them as well and help them find awareness. And also, the positive with it too is where are your strengths within whatever that type of parenting is, because let's leverage that too. I've had people come for parent coaching and they say, well, I'm not this parent. How do I become that parent? And it's
Hmm.
like, there's a reason you're not that parent. There's a reason that your strengths are in this area. So let's find a way, instead of you stressing out, trying to reinvent a person to say, I'm going to become this parent. No, 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 no. Let's have you be the parent that you are. You're more naturally in the style. So let's leverage those strengths and figure out what we can do for that to keep that connection going, or whatever you're coming to me for parent coaching for.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We're all so different. Plus, we come from different environment, and we kind of carry those things. Um,
Yeah.
is there? You mentioned assessment. Is there anything for kids? Like, there's so many for adults to figure out personality, so you can maybe catch your child at early age, assess your child at the age of 3 or 5 or 6, and then realize that maybe it needs some type of direction. That's my first question. And then the first 7 years are critical. Everybody's is talking about that, and it's been scientifically proven and things like that. And you talk about cortex, and I'm sure you know a little bit on that. If you could share with us, like, what if you missed the bolt, and if you realize, oh, I dropped the ball the first 7 years. Is there any way I could pick it up and make it up, in the next 7 years? Um, and then, would you please talk about that real quick? And then I have one more question after that.
Absolutely. I definitely have coached in situations where people said, I dropped the ball at the 7-year mark. And
Hmm.
I'm thinking of somebody who I believe their child was 9 years old when I started coaching with them. And it was what was great about the situation is the person recognized that and was very coachable. So
Hmm.
we're already going to start on a great playing field right there to say, okay, we're recognizing that these unhealthy patterns, these unhealthy things have, come for your child because, it's been developed for 9 years. And so now they're able to recognize that, come to me. But I would say there is hope. There absolutely is. Don't ever feel like any situation is hopeless. And that's something I really want parents to know too, is that when I look at a situation, I don't sit with my notebook and say, "Oh, wow, this parent, oh, that's not good." That sort of thing. I go, where's the potential for growth here? Where's the place where there can be good? What can we turn around for this where there can be some good to come for this? And so, whatever age the child is at, even if it's past that, prime 7 years, as you spoke about, Velko, that's something I really want to have parents know. If you won't give up on your kids and eventually come to the place of recognizing, gosh, I need to make some changes, then I won't give up on you. And I'll make sure that we can find a place where those changes can start to implement. Now, your kid's going to have whatever it is, 9 years of whatever paradigms have been going on. So it's gonna be a lot more work,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean it's impossible.
Um, what are your recommendations for entitlement? So now the child is maybe like the ball has been dropped, and the child is um, maybe even a teenager or before a teenager, because sometimes you could have a child that's been coming up pretty well, and then they have bad influence from someone in close proximity or someone that's inspirational to them at school or something like that, and they could change their behavior 180. So you what about, I think entitlement has to be one of the common issues with children. So what's a good approach to overcome that somehow? Teach your child.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things you asked too, Velko, is if there's an assessment for kids. If
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
if there's one in particular, I don't necessarily know, but I do know the one I was speaking about. Feeler, intuitor, sensor,
Hmm.
thinker. You actually can use that one on the child. I personally don't know how to assess a child to figure that out. I do know that typically, if your child is younger in the toddler age, they're going to probably be a feeler because of not having that prefrontal cortex. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they permanently are. It's that season of life for them.
Hmm.
So that's something to be aware of too, is what season of life your kids are in, what's going on with them developmentally. So I would say whatever it is, if your kid, we're saying your teen is in a place where they're having bad influence and they're making some choices that, are not going to have the best outcomes for them,
Hmm.
then one of the things again is figuring out where that connection was broken or where it's struggling, and figure out where it needs to be reestablished. Why is the kid going in that direction? And again, that could be another thing with the styles. There's with the styles, there's more that get more influence, and there's some that say, well, I know who I am, I know who I want to be, so I don't care, if the crowd's telling me to do this, I'm not going to do that. And so being aware to know where your kid falls within all of that too helps. But I would say that's another thing too with the type of clients I've had, in that is really figuring out the root. And that's actually the name of my practice. It's Roots Parent Coaching.
Mm.
And that's what I really try to focus on, is let's figure out the root of what's going on with the parent, and let's figure out the root of what's going on with the child.
Mm.
Because if I come in and just give you the quick fix, the quick band-aid fix, it might get you through a couple months, maybe even a few years.
Right.
But there's a point where that's not going to work,
Yeah.
because we didn't get to the root of what's internally happening with the parent and what's internally happening with the child.
So your parenting coaching is healing the parent first rather than the child.
I would say a lot of that comes out. Typically, people will come to me and say, I'm at my wit's end. I don't know what to do with my child. Help me. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And as we go further on, there's kind of that step back to go, as a parent, I've seen where I've contributed to this. And that's when I see the most fruitful type of coaching happen,
Hmm.
is in those moments when the parent can step back to say, oh, I need to make some changes. And then my kid can follow through with that, instead of just constantly blaming the child for what's going on.
Yeah. So what if we apply the same concept as, God, the ultimate father, and if we apply the same parenting style of mercy and grace and forgiveness, so offering the education proactively up front is our responsibility, and then their choice of obedience is their choice. And if they choose not to be obedient and ask for help, we help them. and we fix the situation. If they choose to be obedient, we reward them with blessings.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that was another thing that when you're asking about the tips, that's something that I think a lot of parents unfortunately don't leverage is getting into a lot of I'm losing the word, when you just get into these battles. And instead those things can be leveraged as helping your kids see that they have a choice. You know, there's a choice to do this, and the consequence or the thing that will follow through with that will be this, the result. And then there's this choice. And typically, with kids, you want to just give them at least two choices, just because it's too overwhelming for them at a younger age to be choosing 8 million things. So, you know, for example, and finding the place, that's what you said too, where the learning can happen. Because I just went swimming with my kids today, and you know, my son he wasn't understanding that um, we were going to go change into the locker room, and to not put his whole shoes on, not to put his socks on, because then he can't get his swimsuit off, right? And I was trying to explain that to him, and I said, your socks are going to get wet, honey. And he just, didn't care for whatever reason.
So
And
what?
so,
So what if they get wet?
so what? So at that point, I went, okay, we'll go with
No,
so what.
he probably doesn't think, okay, they're gonna get wet. What's the big deal?
Yeah. Yeah. What's the big deal? And so he continued to go, and I said, okay, buddy. I said, I'm trying to show you this, and it looks like whatever reason, we don't want to speak about that. So that's fine. And, sure enough, we get into the locker room. He's uncomfortable with his socks, and he's struggling to get his swim trunks off. And, it was a great learning opportunity. But being able to find those moments when to just step back and say, yeah, my kid has to learn on this one. It's not natural to do that as a parent, right? We always want to make
Right.
sure our kid doesn't suffer or go through something where they have to learn. And sometimes it's just, I mean, I have to learn that way sometimes too.
Yeah.
So sometimes your kids have to also. And so just figuring out to go, okay, let me step back in this moment with the wet socks, and, let him figure it out.
One thing that children teach us is what's really important in life. You know, because it sounds like a cliche, but they really teach us on how to be brave, how to have naive faith, and not to sweat the small things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They
Well,
teach that.
in closing, what are some general tips, and how can people follow you? How can people find you? What are some ways for people to get connected with you and continue to learn from you?
Absolutely. So I'm all over social media. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, at Roots Parent Coaching. And also, I have the email rootsparentcoaching@gmail.com. Those are great ways to get a hold of me with any kinds of questions that you have in regards to parenting and parent coaching, everything like that. And a couple of tips to just leave off with parents and families is just what Velko said, don't sweat the small stuff. And that's the biggest thing your kids are going to really help you is we lose that as adults. Unfortunately, we get stuck in the moment, or this needs to be done, that bill needs to be paid, and our kids are right there to be able to teach us to not sweat the small stuff. And so observe your kids, because they actually teach you a lot. And use more opportunities to be curious and figure out, why does my kid see the world this way? Because that's going to help you change with seeing the world in certain ways that I'm sure will bring a lot of transformational change.
Yeah. And I think also we have to take responsibility for the lack of education, because any education that we do reactively it's our fault. And sometimes we get very emotional when our kids make mistake and we didn't teach them, and
Mhm.
we accept and expect that common sense. We expect them to have common sense, but we didn't teach them. So a lot of our parenting mistakes come from that. And some parents go as far as even creating emotional traumas by calling their kids stupid or
Right.
unable, and they never taught them. So it's unfair. So being
Mhm.
proactive, it's almost like it's like a the most important job. It's almost like creating a curriculum. It's like a very very important thing, and just we need to lead them better. Take responsibility to lead them better. I think we could also
Yeah.
the parents,
Yeah.
and we can
I
learn from them, right? My daughter and I, we have this tradition. Every Friday we meet for dinner, and we have a conversation. Same page Friday we call it, and we've been doing it for many years. So it's a great tradition that we have. And I ask her business advice. Sometimes she's always right on the money. Like I would ask her, I would share with her some experience with clients, and sometimes she would be like, "Why don't you fire this client? You don't deserve this. You're worth more than that." So she would give me like the pep talk, because she's not attached to money, or
Mm,
she's only focusing on observing the experience with me, and she
yeah.
feels my energy. So kids sometimes can help us be more grounded and live in the now, stay in the present. So sometimes kids would challenge us to do things that we would think are not significantly important. They'll be like, "Hey, take the day off today, let's go to the beach or something." And then those are the actual moments that we would have regret on our deathbed for not spending more of those,
Yeah.
instead of chasing a bonus or chasing the money or something like that. So they could be amazing teachers as well, right? And help us in parenting. Uh,
Absolutely.
but kids need us to lead them. Such an
Mhm.
amazing pleasure to meet you. Biffy, share with us, how did you come up with that name? Not you, but your nickname. It's a very interesting story. And
Hmm.
share with us a little bit about that.
Well, my real name's Elizabeth, and so when my brother was 2, he called me Elizabeth, and everyone just said, "Oh, loved it." So my family called me Biff or Biffy, and then as I got older, I had a conversation with a couple high school friends, and they said, because Elizabeth, I was called Liz a lot too. So they said, "Well, do people call you Liz? Do people call you Beth? What do people call you?" And what does your family call you? So I said, oh, I go by Liz, and my family calls me Biffy. And they went crazy over that. And they said, we're going to call you that too. And so it just stuck. And now I'm in that world where I get introduced as either one or the other, depending on, what's appropriate for the situation or what reason. And then people end up talking about the same person, but they don't realize it. They're saying, oh, you know that Elizabeth, oh, you know that Biffy. And they're talking about the same person. They don't realize it.
Yeah, so my future wife, we're getting married in September. She's called her name
Oh,
is
congratulations.
Bliss Elizabeth Clark. Yeah. So her
Oh,
name is Elizabeth too.
congratulations. That's so exciting.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
Yeah.
Such a testimony of our living God.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen to that.